That day remains etched in my memory as the most exhilarating of my life. It began as an ordinary, uneventful day, the kind where life's routines lull you into a state of peaceful oblivion. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting my apartment in a warm glow as I lounged on the couch, idly flipping through television channels. But life, as always, had a surprise in store. A peculiar gurgling noise emanated from the bathroom, followed by a resounding splash that jolted me upright. My stomach clenched as I recognized the all-too-familiar sound. The plumbing was acting up again. Past experience had taught me the futility of DIY repairs. My previous attempt, guided by a YouTube tutorial, had only exacerbated the problem. With a sigh of resignation, I retrieved my phone and located the contact information for a local plumber I had used once before. I recalled him being efficient and professional, though our interaction had been minimal. Still, the prospect of a stranger in my personal space filled me with a vague unease. Approximately an hour later, a knock echoed through the apartment. I opened the door to find him standing there, toolbox in hand, his rugged appearance as I remembered. He appeared to be in his early 30s, perhaps a few years my senior, with a thick beard, sharply defined features, and arms that strained against his work shirt. His muscular physique conveyed an air of competence and strength. "Hey, I'm here for the busted pipe," he announced, offering a courteous smile as he entered. "Yeah, it's in the bathroom," I replied, gesturing for him to follow. Without hesitation, he proceeded to the bathroom and began assessing the damage beneath the sink. I observed him from the doorway, his movements precise and practiced, reflecting his expertise. My thoughts, however, strayed from gratitude. The way his shirt clung to his back as he worked, the subtle flex of his muscles with each movement, these details inexplicably captivated my attention. I mentally chided myself for such thoughts. He's just the plumber, I reasoned, feeling foolish for entertaining such notions. Yet, his quiet confidence and self-assured demeanor had an undeniable effect on me. Moments later he straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. "All set," he declared, turning to face me. "Replaced the pipe, tightened everything up. Shouldn't give you any more trouble." "Thanks," I managed, striving for a casual tone despite my accelerated pulse. "I appreciate it." His gaze lingered for a beat, and I could have sworn I detected something unspoken in his eyes. He cleared his throat and glanced around the small bathroom, as if searching for a topic. "You sure there's nothing else you need help with?" he inquired, his voice casual yet laced with an undercurrent that sent a shiver down my spine. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. Was it my imagination, or was there something more to his question? My heart pounded as I searched for words, but the silence only amplified my awareness of the situation. I realized, with a startling clarity, that I didn't want him to leave just yet. "Well, actually," I began, feeling a blush rise in my neck. "There might be something else." He raised an eyebrow, his gaze locking onto mine as he stepped closer. "Oh? What's that?" I swallowed hard, my nerves overwhelming me. "It's hard to explain," I stammered, my cheeks burning under his intense scrutiny. His lips curved into a knowing smile as he closed the distance between us. "You can try." Frozen in place, I felt the air crackle with unspoken tension. The heat radiating from his body was palpable, and my mind raced with a torrent of thoughts I couldn't articulate. The attraction I felt was undeniable, my heart pounding in my chest as he waited for me to speak. And then, before I could overthink it, the words escaped my lips. "I've been thinking about you," I confessed, my voice barely a whisper. "Ever since you walked in, I haven't been able to stop." His smile deepened, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. He took another step, his presence filling the small bathroom. My breath hitched as I realized how close we were standing, how easily I could reach out and touch him. "Is that right?" he murmured, his voice low and husky, testing the waters. I nodded, unable to speak. I couldn't explain the sudden surge of emotion, the way his mere presence had awakened something unexpected within me. All I knew was that I couldn't stop thinking about him, and I didn't want to. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved, the air thick with anticipation. Then, just as I thought the moment might pass, he reached out and gently cupped my face in his hand. His touch was warm and firm yet gentle, sending a shiver down my spine as his thumb brushed against my cheek. I was lost, unsure whether to pull away or lean into his touch. Before I could react, he closed the gap between us, his lips pressing against mine. The kiss began softly, tentatively, as if we were both exploring uncharted territory. But the moment our lips connected, all hesitation vanished, replaced by a fierce, undeniable hunger. His hands moved over my body, drawing me closer as the kiss deepened, sending a wave of heat surging through me. It was an experience unlike any other. Each touch, each kiss igniting sparks within me, leaving me craving more. The world outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of us immersed in the intensity of the moment. The passion between us escalated with each passing second. His hands, calloused from years of labor, caressed me with a tenderness that stole my breath. The firm pressure of his lips against mine sent shivers down my spine. The only sound that anchored me to reality was the dripping water from the newly repaired pipe, a subtle reminder of our surroundings. But even that seemed distant as we lost ourselves in the heat of the moment. I pulled him closer, my fingers digging into the fabric of his shirt, feeling the solid muscles of his chest beneath. He responded with a low groan, his hands tightening around my waist as if he couldn't bear to release me. The kiss intensified, and for a brief moment, I forgot everything else, the world outside, the boundaries we were crossing. Just as suddenly as it began, reality came crashing back. He broke the kiss first, his breathing heavy, his eyes searching mine as if trying to comprehend what had just transpired. I stood there, heart pounding, my mind reeling from the realization of our actions. I started, but the words caught in my throat. What could I possibly say? That I hadn't anticipated this? That I didn't understand what had come over me? His gaze softened, the earlier intensity replaced by a more vulnerable uncertainty. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, his hand still resting gently on my waist. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just surprised, I guess." He chuckled softly, easing the tension in the air. "You and me both." For a long moment we stood in silence, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from each other's bodies, yet both unsure of how to proceed. The unspoken question hung heavy between us. What now? I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself. "I didn't expect this," I admitted, my voice shaky. "But I don't regret it." His eyes flickered with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. Relief, perhaps, or understanding. He stepped back slightly, granting me some space but keeping his hand on my arm. "Neither do I." The simplicity of his words resonated deeply. It wasn't a grand declaration of love or a sweeping romantic gesture, just pure, unadulterated honesty. And somehow, that made it even more real. He rubbed the back of his neck, glancing around the small bathroom as if searching for an escape route. "I should probably finish up and head out," he said, though his voice held a note of hesitation, suggesting he wasn't entirely ready to leave. I nodded, but the thought of his departure caused a pang of disappointment. I didn't want this to end. Didn't want him to walk out the door and leave me with only the memory of what had happened. But I also didn't know how to ask him to stay. Didn't know if it was even appropriate. "You don't have to rush," I said, my voice perhaps a bit too casual. "I mean, if you're not busy." He raised an eyebrow, a playful smile tugging at his lips. "Are you asking me to stick around?" I felt a blush creep up my neck. "I just thought we could hang out for a bit, maybe grab a drink or something." He chuckled again, this time a little louder. "You're pretty smooth, you know that?" I shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant despite my racing heart. "Just trying to be a good host." He grinned, his eyes sparkling with amusement. "Well, in that case, I guess I can stick around for a bit." We left the bathroom, the tension between us dissipating slightly as we entered the living room. I retrieved a couple of beers from the refrigerator, handing him one as we settled onto the couch. For a moment, everything felt almost normal, like we were just two people enjoying a quiet afternoon together. But the underlying tension remained, an unspoken acknowledgement of what had transpired between us. He took a long sip of his beer, leaning back against the couch as he surveyed my apartment. "Nice place," he commented casually. "Thanks," I replied, my mind still racing. "It's small, but it works." We engaged in small talk for a while, discussing work, the weather, the typical topics people resort to when avoiding more meaningful conversation. But the more we talked, the more comfortable I felt. The earlier tension had given way to an easy rapport that surprised me. It felt as if we had known each other for longer than just a couple of encounters, as if there was a natural connection between us. And yet, beneath the surface, the simmering heat remained. Every time our eyes met, every time our fingers brushed, I felt the pull, the desire that hadn't faded. No matter how much we tried to act like nothing had happened, the tension lingered. Eventually, the conversation faded, and we both fell into a comfortable silence, sipping our beers and gazing out the window as the late afternoon sun began its descent. "You ever think about what just happened?" I asked, breaking the quiet. He turned to face me, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot." I wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or anxious. He set his beer down on the table, leaning forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. I think we both know there's something between us." Hearing him voice the thought aloud made it feel more real, more tangible. I nodded slowly, unable to trust myself to speak. "I'm not saying I know what this is," he continued, his voice steady but cautious. "But I do know that I don't want to pretend like it didn't happen." I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. "Neither do I." He smiled, the tension between us morphing into something more certain, more grounded. "So, where do we go from here?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment I was at a loss for words. I didn't have all the answers, barely any, in fact. But I knew one thing for sure. I didn't want this to end. Not yet. "I guess we figure it out," I said softly, but with conviction. He nodded, leaning back against the couch, his gaze unwavering. "I'm good with that." The sun had begun to set, casting a warm, golden glow through the windows. The world outside felt distant and irrelevant. In that moment, it was just the two of us, sitting in the quiet of my apartment, the unspoken promise of something more hanging in the air. As evening approached, the warm light from the setting sun softened everything, creating a sense of intimacy and tranquility. The world outside seemed to melt away, leaving only the two of us. We sat in silence for a while, content to bask in the comfortable quiet. But the weight of what had transpired between us remained, undeniable. Eventually, the unspoken thoughts began to surface. Luke, the plumber, as I had learned from our earlier conversation, shifted slightly on the couch, his knee brushing against mine. The light touch sent a spark through me, a reminder of the tension that still simmered beneath the surface. He glanced at me, his gaze soft yet serious, as if carefully considering his words before speaking. "I don't usually do this," he said after a moment, his voice quiet but firm. "You know, get involved with clients." I nodded, swallowing hard. "I didn't think you did." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "I'm not saying I regret it, because I don't. But it's just, I wasn't expecting this." "Neither was I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "But I'm not sorry it happened." Luke's gaze softened, and he offered a small smile. "Me either." The silence returned, but this time it felt different, heavier, more laden with meaning. I could feel the pull between us, the same electric charge that had been present since the moment he entered my apartment. It was undeniable, and now that we had acknowledged it, impossible to ignore. He shifted closer, his knee pressing more firmly against mine as he leaned forward slightly. "What are we doing?" he asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. I didn't have a clear answer for him, not one that made sense anyway. All I knew was that there was something between us, something I couldn't explain but didn't want to let go of. I searched his face, looking for a sign that he felt the same confusion, the same pull. When our eyes met, I knew he did. "I don't know," I admitted, my heart racing. "But I don't want it to stop." His eyes darkened, and for a moment I thought he might retreat, might suggest we leave things as they were. But instead he reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against my hand. The touch was soft, almost tentative, but it sent a jolt through me, and I found myself leaning into him, closing the gap between us. "I don't either," he murmured, his voice husky with emotion. Before I could respond, his hand cupped the back of my neck, pulling me closer until our lips met once more. This time, the kiss was different. Less hesitant, more confident, as if we had both made a decision, and there was no turning back. The heat between us flared, intense and consuming, and I lost myself in the moment, in the feeling of his hands on my skin, his lips on mine. We stumbled back onto the couch, our bodies pressed close together as the kiss deepened. My heart pounded in my chest, and I couldn't get enough of him, the taste of him, the feel of his body against mine. Every touch sent a thrill through me, and I knew in that moment that I was completely and utterly hooked. Luke's hands roamed over my back, pulling me closer as his lips moved down to my neck, sending shivers down my spine. I tangled my fingers in his hair, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps as he kissed a trail along my jawline. The intensity was overwhelming, but I didn't want it to stop. I didn't want him to stop. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, Luke pulled back, his breathing heavy as he stared down at me. His eyes were filled with a mixture of desire and hesitation, and I could see the internal struggle playing out on his face. He wanted this as much as I did, but something was holding him back. "Wait," he whispered, his voice rough. "We need to slow down." I blinked, my mind still reeling from the intensity of the moment. "Why?" He exhaled slowly, his hands still resting on my shoulders as he looked at me. "Because I don't want this to just be a one-time thing." His words struck me like a physical blow. I had been so caught up in the passion of the moment that I hadn't considered the aftermath. But now that he had voiced the thought, I realized I didn't want this to be a one-time encounter either. "I don't either," I confessed, my voice barely audible. Luke's eyes softened, and he leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to my forehead before pulling back slightly. "Then let's not rush. Let's take our time." I nodded, my heart pounding. He was right. We didn't need to hurry this. Whatever was developing between us was too important, too genuine to rush without careful consideration. I didn't want to jeopardize it by moving too fast. We sat there for a moment, catching our breath as the intensity subsided. But even though we had pulled back, the connection between us still burned strong, and I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of quiet conversation and stolen glances. We talked about everything and nothing, laughing at silly jokes and sharing personal stories. It was effortless and natural, as if we had known each other for far longer than a few encounters. But beneath the surface, the tension still simmered, waiting for the opportune moment to resurface. When Luke finally stood to leave, a pang of disappointment shot through me. I didn't want him to go, didn't want the night to end. But I knew we were taking things slow, building something more substantial than a fleeting moment. He lingered by the door, his hand resting on the handle as he turned to look at me one last time. "I'll see you again soon, right?" I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "Definitely." He nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. "Good. I'll call you." With that, he opened the door and stepped out into the night, leaving me standing in the quiet of my apartment, my heart still racing from the intensity of the evening. I leaned against the door, my mind replaying the events of the night over and over. It wasn't just the physical connection that had me reeling. It was the deeper connection we had forged, the mutual understanding that this wasn't just a one-time thing. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful, like maybe, just maybe, I had found something real, something worth cherishing. But the story didn't end there. The best was yet to come. The following days were filled with a peculiar blend of anticipation and nervousness. I couldn't stop thinking about Luke, about everything that had transpired between us, about what the future might hold. He had promised to call, and though I knew it hadn't been long, I found myself checking my phone constantly, waiting for his name to appear on the screen. When the call finally came, it was late in the afternoon, just as the golden light of the setting sun was bathing my apartment in a warm glow. I glanced at the screen, my heart leaping at the sight of his name, and quickly answered. "Hey," I said, attempting to sound casual despite my accelerated pulse. "Hey," he replied, his voice low and warm. "I was wondering if you'd like to grab a drink tonight. Nothing fancy, just, to hang out." I smiled, a wave of warmth washing over me. "Yeah, I'd like that." "Great," he said, a hint of relief in his voice. "I'll pick you up around 7. "Perfect." I hung up the phone, my heart racing with a mixture of excitement and nerves. I knew tonight wasn't just about drinks. It was about exploring what was happening between us, about taking the next step in this undefined relationship. But despite the uncertainty, a sense of calm settled over me. I wanted to see where this would lead, wanted to delve deeper into the connection we shared. By the time 7 o'clock arrived, I was more than ready. I had spent most of the afternoon trying to distract myself from the mounting anticipation, but now that the moment was here, I felt strangely at peace. When Luke knocked on the door, I opened it to find him standing there, dressed in a simple button-down shirt and jeans, looking effortlessly handsome. "Ready?" he asked, his eyes lighting up when he saw me. "Yeah," I replied, stepping outside and closing the door behind me. We headed to a small, cozy bar not far from my apartment, the kind of place that wasn't overly crowded but had enough ambiance to feel lively. We found a booth in the corner, away from the noise of the bar, and ordered drinks. As the evening progressed, it became clear that the tension between us was still present, but it had transformed into something different, something more comfortable and less urgent. We talked for hours, covering a wide range of topics. He shared stories about his work, about growing up in the city, and I reciprocated with my own experiences, recounting how I ended up in this apartment and the small challenges of everyday life. It was easy and natural, as if we had known each other for years. But as the evening wore on, the conversation shifted, and the weight of what had transpired between us began to reemerge. "So," Luke began, taking a sip of his drink before setting it down, his gaze fixed on mine. "We haven't really talked about the other night." I felt my heart skip a beat, but I nodded in agreement. "Yeah, we haven't. I'm not trying to rush things," he continued, his voice soft but serious. I've been thinking about it a lot. About us." I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. My pulse quickened. Me too. A pause hung in the air, thick with unspoken thoughts. I could feel the intensity of his gaze, the weight of the moment pressing down on us. This was it, the moment of decision. "I don't want this to be a one-time thing," he said, echoing the words he'd spoken that night in my apartment. I think there's something here, something worth exploring." His words hung in the air, and I felt a surge of emotion. I had been thinking the same thing, that whatever was happening between us was too significant, too real, to simply walk away from. But hearing him say it aloud made it feel more concrete, more attainable. "I agree," I said, my voice steady but soft. "I don't want this to be a one-time thing either." Luke's expression softened, and he reached across the table, his hand brushing lightly against mine. The simple touch sent a thrill through me, and I couldn't help but smile. "So, what do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He chuckled softly, his thumb brushing lightly over the back of my hand. "I guess we take it one step at a time." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. We didn't need all the answers right now. We didn't need to know exactly where this was going. All we had to do was take it one day at a time, figure things out as we went along. We spent the rest of the night talking and laughing, the tension between us easing into something more comfortable, more certain. When the bar finally closed, we walked back to my place, the cool night air enveloping us as we strolled through the quiet streets. When we reached my door, Luke hesitated, his gaze flickering between me and the entrance. "I should probably go," he said, though there was a hint of reluctance in his voice. I bit my lip, not wanting the night to end just yet. "You don't have to." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and for a moment I thought he might pull away. But then he smiled, his hand slipping into mine as he stepped closer. "Okay," he whispered. We headed inside, the quiet of the apartment enveloping us as I closed the door behind us. For a moment, we just stood there, the weight of the night hanging between us. But then Luke reached out, pulling me close, and I felt the warmth of his body against mine, the steady beat of his heart beneath my palm. The kiss came naturally, soft and slow at first, but it quickly deepened, the familiar heat building between us once again. It was just like before, intense, consuming, but this time there was something more, something deeper. It wasn't just about the physical connection anymore. It was about the bond we had begun to forge, the trust and understanding that had grown between us. We stumbled toward the couch, our bodies pressed together as the kiss deepened. My hands roamed over his back, feeling the firm muscles beneath his shirt, and a thrill of excitement rushed through me. But this time, there was no urgency, no rush to get lost in the passion. We were taking our time, savoring every touch, every kiss. Luke's hands slid under my shirt, his fingers warm against my skin, and I shivered at the sensation. His touch was gentle, careful, as if he was afraid of pushing too far, too fast. But I didn't want him to hold back. I wanted him to know that this was okay, that I was ready for whatever came next. I pulled away from the kiss just long enough to look into his eyes, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "It's okay," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I want this." Luke's eyes darkened, and he nodded, his hands tightening on my waist as he pulled me closer. "Me too," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. We continued for hours, lost in each other's embrace. And as true love sometimes arises unexpectedly, it happened right there, in the quiet intimacy of my apartment, between a plumber and me. It was a night that began with a leaky pipe and ended with the promise of something much more profound, a connection that transcended the ordinary and hinted at the extraordinary possibilities that lay ahead.